Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael OHagan. Since 2003, when we opened in North Denver, it's been my distinct pleasure to be first the founding principal of Arrupe Jesuit High School, and I now serve as president. The partnership with ACE began, I think, in our third month, and I'm not sure. I might be the only one in the room who knows that ACE had an office, I think, on Broadway in Hamden, if I remember correctly, where we first learned about the potential of this partnership. So I have a little bit of time tonight to tell you about our kiddos, but I think more importantly, I have an opportunity to say thank you to you and make sure you understand the impact that you have on the lives of young people. I think perhaps one other clarifying point, I did not know there would be graduates of Arrupe in the audience tonight, so should you begin to hear giggles or snickers, please ignore the front row. I'm a Brooklyn-born son of a New York City firefighter. My wife, God bless her, is a clinical psychologist. She's the brains of the family. And on one occasion, she's had to tell me that feelings are okay. Feelings are good. You know, you should have feelings. So what I'm going to share with you is really the lessons learned over a lifetime of serving young people. When I was 23 or so, probably about 1988, 1989, I was desperately trying to avoid Fordham Law School. And so I took a job teaching at a Jesuit middle school in the Lower East Side of Manhattan at a time where nobody really wanted to be in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And I had the great fortune of working for a young Jesuit priest who had a very simple premise about the service of kids. He felt that if you wanted to be of service to kids who lived on the margins and whose families were facing the kind of challenges and realities that I certainly had never encountered, you had to immerse yourself in that life. I think we all know on some level that's a foolish exercise because you can never know with certainty the doubt, the fear, the anxiety that a life lived in poverty, kind of the toll that it enacts on families. But if you try and you're willing to kind of put in the effort, that glimpse into that life, it begins to create relationships. And if you pay attention to those relationships, you begin to accept some responsibility in ways that I think you all accept that responsibility because you begin to realize you can make a difference. So when I was 23, this is what we did. I lived in a walk-up tenement in Chinatown. Chinese naturalization and immigration was on the first floor. There was a Puerto Rican AA group on the second floor, and me, a kid named Timmy Goley and another named Jim Lucy were the Irish amigos living on the third floor. We would start class about 8 in the morning. We would teach until a little before 3. We would coach from 3 to 5. We would have dinner at the local Jesuit residence. We'd come back and run study halls until about 8, and then we'd pile kids in a van and drive them through all the different parts of the Lower East Side. Best year of my life. I did it for a second year, and then we went and replicated the model in Boston. Here's what I learned in those years. I learned the weight that young people carry each and every day. I still remember a kid, Richard, he was about that big. He pulled a knife on us on a Friday night. Friday nights we'd open up the school, we'd play basketball in the backyard. Because we had a backyard, the kids in the projects thought we were uppity, so they would chuck D batteries at us from the upper floors, and you would teach the little kids how to scatter and collect the batteries afterwards. On this particular night, Richard pulled a knife on us, and it was probably the worst knife pulling in the history of knife pulling, but it led to this question: why? Why is this pint-sized little kid? His mom was battling such an addiction to heroin that she'd fallen into a life of prostitution, and I can have no idea of imagining what was coming home in the evening to that kid's apartment, but he was carrying a knife to protect himself. I remember a kiddo when we would drop him off some nights, and you'd roll the kids out of the van, and he could hear the arguing on the second, third floor of the apartment building, and so Eduardo would prefer to just sit on the stoop. In itself, not a great decision, but he'd prefer to sit on the stoop until his dad passed out, because then he knew when he went upstairs it'd be a lot safer. I could give you stories like that all night long. It was the meetings with families, however, that were the difference maker. The first dinner I ever had was at the Santos family. They lived in a little apartment above a Chinese restaurant on Canal Street. And when we walked in, it was this extraordinary Dominican feast they'd laid out. But you suddenly learned how small the apartment was. And afterwards, I talked to Father Jack, and I said, what was that all about? It was Wesley and his older brother, Juan Carlos. It was mom and dad, grandma, and the little sister. Mom, dad, grandma, and the little sister slept in one room off to the side. Wesley and Juan Carlos slept on the pull-out sofa in the main room, and then there was just a little kitchen area to the right. All that I could kind of process, but along the floorboards in the apartment were all these steel wool, kind of balls of steel wool pressed into the floorboards. And so I said to Jack, what's up with the steel wool? The rats from the Chinese restaurant had come up the walls and eaten through the wood and were biting the boys on the feet while they slept at night. I had a bad day when I was a kid. If my mom had run out of grape jelly and there was raspberry jelly on a sandwich, what do you do with that? We went to sing Christmas carols once in the projects of Alphabet City, Avenue A, Avenue B, Avenue C, and the dealers in the projects would disable the elevators because they wanted to be able to hear the police coming up the stairwell. And so, we must have looked like the Apple Dumpling Gang because it's Christmas, we're wearing goofy Christmas stuff, and we're walking up the stairs, and I said to Jack, when we die tonight, because you're going to get us killed, my mom is going to be really mad at you. And we walked into this apartment, and it was extraordinary. I don't even know whose family was not represented, but the place was decorated to the nines. There was more food out for us than the family probably ate in a week itself. The two great takeaways from those events were our families don't want to talk about the here and the now. They don't need me or us to remind them what's going on in the present. What they want to talk about is the future in ways that Ian just described beautifully. They want to know about what are you going to do to help my child realize her dreams? What are you going to do so that the future can look different for our kiddos? There's a Jesuit by the name of Father Greg Boyle. He works in Los Angeles in the Dolores Missions, and he runs Homeboy Industries. You may have heard of it. Homeboy is the largest gang intervention program in the world, and Greg would tell you it's not actually intervention. It's a job opportunities program. It's meant to give people who've lived a life in gangs an opportunity, the chance to know that there's something else. In describing his work, Father Boyle has this profound observation. He talks often that when we're working with folks on the margins, we often find ourselves standing in judgment. And we often ask, well, how could that happen? Why would you let yourself do that? And with each of those questions, Each time you stand in judgment, you create a little bit more distance between yourself and the people you want to serve. So Father Greg says that really what we should do is stand in awe of what some people are asked to carry in this world. And when you find yourself standing in awe of people, you begin to appreciate the sacrifices they make. You begin to appreciate the responsibilities they assume in their own lives. So I had this chance when I was young to learn some of these lessons in New York, and then we repeated it again in Boston. There's now, I think, 46 of these middle schools across the country. And so I find myself in Denver, and it's 2003, and we have a chance to open Arrupe Jesuit High School. Average income for Arrupe for a family of four is about $41,000 a year. Those of us who are family people can sit with that number for a second and think about the reality of 41,000 and your children. Our free and reduced lunch number is just under 80%. And yet this was the school we opened. We wanted to be of service to the community. And so these lessons that I had learned earlier in my life, you heard Brent talk about cura personalis. It's a 500-year-old tradition that says if you're going to care for people, you have to be worried about the whole person. And so when we opened Arrupe, we committed ourselves to professional development that would meet the needs of kids who had known in their lives the type of trauma that no kid should ever know. Probably no adult should ever know. We had a licensed clinical social worker on staff the day we opened. We now have 4 licensed clinical social workers. We don't silo them in a single part of the building. Their work informs everything we do. So in our 9th and 10th grade, you don't get to fail. You fail a course, you have to do it over again. You might have to drag your butt in after school. You might find yourself at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning at Arrupe. But you are going to create for yourself the opportunity to realize success. We have a discipline system that's grounded in conflict resolution. I serve 438 kids. The vast majority of them, no conflict. They're pretty comfortable coming right back at you. They don't know, see the giggles, I told you the giggles were coming. They don't necessarily know how to resolve conflict. They don't necessarily know what that opportunity looks like. We do college applications throughout the school year. We help moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas do FAFSA. We have a corporate work study program that puts every kid in our school out at the workplace one day a week. There's a good number of you here in the crowd tonight who hire our kids. Not only does that obviously help them defer the cost of their tuition, but if your mom works in the hotel industry or she's cleaning offices in the evening, you don't know what an engineer does. You don't necessarily know what it takes to become a nurse. Our kids do. And so each and every day, we make sure our young people know how much we invest in them because we want them to be reminded of their worth. We want them to be reminded of their value. We want them to be reminded of their promise. And when they see an adult community investing in themselves in that way, they find it much easier to invest in themselves and to make the sacrifices and the dedication that these 3 young women have made during their time in North Denver. Does it work, right? I mean, we should probably see, is there a return on investment? So with a great deal of pride, I will tell you this. We have graduated 875 students from Arrupe. 50% of those kids are first in their families to graduate high school. 93% of them are the first to go on to college. They have earned $70 million in merit-based scholarships. There are 52 Daniel Scholars among them. Every one of those kids has gone on to college. And they will tell you it's because people like you believe in them. And people like you want to know them as individuals. And that's what social emotional learning is all about, is letting kids know that they have value and that people are willing to partner with them. So I thank you for all you do. I thank you for being here tonight. I thank you for those wonderful 3 young women right there. Have a great evening.